screen, just asking you if it's okay to do the recording. Once you click OK on that, everything will move forward. Glad to have everyone on board tonight. This is our monthly session for beef and forages. We've got a pretty good crowd, looks like, tonight. And glad to have with us Dr. Justin Rhinehart. Justin is our UT Extension beef specialist. His specialty is in reproduction. So we got him talking about his sort of in his wheelhouse tonight. And we're glad to have Justin on board. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Rhinehart.
All right, Scott, can you hear me okay still?
Yes, sir.
All right, can you see my slides?
All looks great.
All right, I'm going to see if I can go ahead and get started here, and eventually I'll get a laser pointer up. All right, looks good. Well, it's good to be with you all this evening. It's been a while, I guess, since I've been over that way. I hadn't been over to Beef Day or anything in a while, or any of the good field days y'all have, but I sure appreciate the opportunity to at least talk to you this way tonight. And talking about artificial insemination, specifically here in commercial herds, you know, talk about it a lot as it relates to seed stock production. A lot of seed stock producers already use it, but one thing we're starting to see a little bit more uptick on using in commercial cow-calf operations, and really glad to see that. Honestly, I kind of I guess when I think about herds in general, the first thing I always go to and think about is commercial herds. That's just what I like to deal with and troubleshoot. And I appreciate, you know, seed stock production, like it quite a bit, but for whatever reason, my default setting is on commercial cattle production. And I just enjoy thinking about how to use all the different things that you can do in that. Certainly a lot different than seed stock, but you know, certainly AI is one of the things, one of the technologies that's not been as readily adopted in commercial cows for a lot of different reasons. You know, I think probably one of the bigger reasons, at least in the Mid-South and certainly here in our state, is the fact that a lot of beef cow-calf production is not your primary source of revenue. So there's just not a whole lot of time and not a lot of market drive, I guess, to incorporate some of these technologies. But hopefully, as we talk about it tonight, you know, it might be something you want to look into and something you want to start moving toward adopting in your herd. And if you're a seed stock producer, certainly I hope tonight will be, you know, beneficial for you too, as you know, commercial producers are ultimately your customer. And one thing I always, you know, say, a couple of things I'll talk about tonight, almost on the face value would seem negative toward seed stock. You know, if you're selling bulls, you might think that AI is not a good thing for you, but hopefully I'll show you that it actually doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, as they say. It can be one of those often talked about, rarely found win-win situations. So anyway, before I get too long-winded on this, I want to go through and discuss a few things and then leave some good time for y'all to ask me questions, or just have some time for, you know, some of you have some things that work differently or better or not as good for you as the things I say. Hopefully we'll have some time here toward the end of this to discuss that. So used to, whenever I talk about AI, you know, I just like right into talking about the economic benefits and genetic benefits and just kind of talk at it. But I thought I'd start off a little bit different this evening and talk about some relatively new extension publications that we put out here in the past few months. I think Scott mentioned that we put those links in the chat box. So if you want to reach up and click wherever your chat box is located on your Zoom platform there, you can click that and you'll see those links, and you'll be able to pull those up and save those, print them out, whatever you want to do with them, and you might even want to have them to look through here on your computer as I'm talking about this. But the first one is not specifically about AI, but I always like to set the stage on why we talk about just, you know, specifically reproduction, why, you know, I focus primarily just on reproductive management and beef cattle as my entire kind of position here with UT, and I guess lay some groundwork to justify why that's so important that we'd work on it so hard. So this first publication we'll talk about is Reproduction's Impact on Beef Cattle Herd Profitability is the title of it. To me, it's kind of a talking about benchmarking or setting some objectives for you to try to reach with reproductive performance in your herd. So Andrew Griffith and I think Andrew may have maybe even been on one of these meetings with you, one of these Zoom meetings. I know he's been there in person before, but his office is in the same building mine is down here in Spring Hill at the Research Center. And we were talking one day, it's been a while back, and he said, hey, you want to write a publication together just talking about how reproduction affects the economics of cattle production? And said, sure. So we sat down and put this together and kind of bounced it back and forth to work on it. Now I'm going to pull up, what I'm going to show you is not a lot of the text or anything, but a couple of the graphs. This one might look a little messy on your screen, but hopefully since you're right there at it, and I'm not showing this on a big screen, we can look a little bit at some of these, some of this smaller text, but I'm not going to go through every number on this. The thing that we did when we started writing this publication or just trying to lay out the examples that are in it is to set a standard, kind of an average return to expenses, return over expenses for a 50 head cow-calf operation in Tennessee. We chose 50 head for a couple of different reasons. When we look at surveys that we did, I say we, but actually Jim Neal did them back before he retired, of the average herd size of producers that we have go through our master beef producer program, then it actually shakes out to about 50 head of cows. Now, if you look at USDA numbers, that's going to be something like 30 head or 28 head. But you know, that includes a lot of other things, you know, folks with one or two cows and that kind of stuff. So that kind of pulls the average down. Of the folks that we work with, that we get a lot of questions from, you know, it's usually going to run about a 2 bull unit or 50 head cow-calf operation. So that's where we started. Put in these variable costs here and the revenue. Again, I'm not going to talk through each one of these, but just wanted to, and again, you've got a link to the publication there, but wanted to show you kind of where we started, just, you know, average 1,200 pound cows and selling wean, and when I say wean, just not necessarily preconditioned, but just selling, you know, general heifer calves and steer calves at, you know, 5 to 550 weight for heifers and steers respectively. And we got this price in here certainly going to float quite a bit, but I think we probably chose these for easy math, but $1.40 and $1.57. So you do all that and you kind of tally up all the costs, the variable costs that you'd have per cow per year. We've got here just shy of $600 of production expenses per cow. And for that 50 head herd, just shy of 30 grand. So if you take the revenue and minus the production costs, return over variable expenses in this situation is about $60 a cow, about $3,000 for a 50 head herd. So a lot of times I hate to even look at it like this because it's not near what we think it is if we actually, you know, pencil in everything, all the production costs that we have. But that's our starting point here. So the rest of what we talked about in that publication and that I just wanted to mention starting out here is talking about how reproduction affects that. So one, and we talk a lot about this in master beef too. So weaning rate is, you know, a measure of reproduction. It's reproduction and some other things, you know, how calf mortality and that kind of stuff. But instead of just doing preg rates or anything, weaning rate is a better place, knowing that it's primarily affected by reproductive performance. But this compares that revenue, that return to variable expenses in these different weaning rate situations of 82%. So if you got 82% of the cows you started out with in a breeding season represented by a weaned calf at the end of all that, then that's what this number is. The number of calves you got relative to the number of calves you started out with to make that calf crop. And actually, and I always like to mention that we're ahead of the national average on weaning rate. If you look at USDA numbers, it's actually down in the mid to high 70s most of the time. But certainly this 82, 88%, 92%, that's going to be stuff we often see for weaning rate for most of the producers we work with across the state. 92 is on the high side. You know, it takes some work to get that done, but certainly not something I think that's out of reach. We can get to at least 90 and a shade better without putting so much input costs in these cows that we can't get it back. Certainly 88% is reachable. When we get down to 82%, you know, we need to really be evaluating who's working for who. Are we working for the cows or the cows working for us kind of a situation. So anyway, these different weaning rates, looking at how that affects this return over variable expenses that I showed how we calculated in that previous slide. Again, all this is in that publication. You go from on a whole herd basis, making just $700 over those expenses to nearly $4,500 just by changing the weaning rate 10%. And so if reproduction is the biggest part of weaning rate and it changes our ability to be profitable that much, then anything we do in reproductive management that improves that overall weaning rate is going to be most of the time a positive investment, well, nearly all the time a positive investment to make on those cows. And the reason I go through this, one, is that we've got that publication that lays it out probably better than most I'd seen in the past, mostly because Andrew was working on it. I'm not trying to give myself credit for that, but just to show that these things that we're going to talk about with artificial insemination in these commercial herds, not only do they improve genetics or give us access to different kinds of genetics and oftentimes better genetics, but it just invariably moves our weaning rate up too when we put that kind of focus and management on a reproductive technology. So besides a lot of other things I'll talk about when we do the cost benefit analysis of AI, there's some other things that we don't always factor into it. One of those things is calving distribution. So, you know, we can talk about getting to a specific weaning rate in different ways. And so we could have a big slug of the calves come early in the calving season. We can kind of have them trickle in throughout the calving season, or we might even have some situations where we kind of start off slow and then wind up calving season with a bang and get to that 82, 88, or 92% calving rate, weaning rate we're talking about. So this compares those different ways. So in this one, just calves kind of trickling in throughout the calving season. This one front loads it a little bit with, when we 35, 30, 35, that's the distribution talking about percent of the calves born in the first 30 days, second 30 days, and third 30 days of that 90-day season. And you can see, again, if we go through that first slide I talked about, the return over variable expenses and the whole herd effect, if we just kind of got them trickling in, again, this is going to affect the weight of those calves when we wean them all as one group is mostly where this comes from. You're looking at $2,500 return over expenses. But if you come over here where we can shift to even just 50% of them coming in the first 30 days, we've impacted our potential profitability by $1,000, at least in this example, in this situation. So, and this didn't say that that's the way it always happens, but it would be a similar trend with whatever numbers you put in it. So it may look a lot better on the return over variable expenses for your situation. It might look just like this, but that trend of shifting the calving distribution, just having more of them born early in that calving season, or the way you might hear me or keep referring back to it as front loading the calving season, is going to affect the bottom line, even within a similar calving season and overall weaning rate, calving weight and weaning rate. So if you put those two together and you kind of get to our more ideal situation, of 92% with at least half of them coming in the first 30 days, you're looking at $5,000 return over variable expenses compared to if they're just kind of trickling in throughout that 90-day season and you only get 82% weaning rate, you're not making very much off 50 cows is really what it comes down to. And again, like I say, you can put whatever numbers you are specific to your situation, but that trend is just there, and it's kind of a laws of physics and economics that's the way it works. If we front load that calving season, and if we increase the overall calving rate, then and by doing that, increase the overall weaning rate, then we're going to have at least a better opportunity to be profitable when the market gives us that opportunity, or in some years lose less than we would otherwise. So again, just kind of go through all that to set up why we focus on talking about reproduction and how I'm going to kind of bring that back. So just keep that stuff in mind, but how these reproductive technologies that we talk about, like AI, they don't just affect that the genetics or what we usually talk about, but it'll affect that overall calving rate, weaning rate, and the distribution, even more importantly, or as importantly, within that calving season of the distribution of how those calves come within that season. So next one we'll talk about gets more at what we had on the title and what we're going to plan on talking about tonight. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, we've got a question in the chat that says, what's the impact of a 45-day calving season versus the variation calving distribution shown for a 90-day calving season?
Yeah, and that's even more ideal. And that's one of the things, a lot of times when I talk about this, y'all may actually prefer listening to me on Zoom instead of live, because I'd probably spent 40 minutes talking about how important I think a calf crop is to start with, right? And so even within that, even if you got a 100-day or 90-day or 60-day, I'm always looking for ways to improve that. And certainly just having a defined calving and breeding season to start with at all is a huge important place to start if you're calving year round. So if you can move it to 45 days and get a 92% weaning rate out of that, I don't know what the numbers exactly would be, but certainly it's going to be higher return over investment for that, so to get that 90+% in 45 days. Because usually too, when you got a 45-day breeding season and you're weaning 92% calf crop to a 45-day breeding season, most all of them are going to hit the ground. Now you're talking about like 80+% of them in the first 30 days, right? And just a handful of them coming after that. And we see that. I mean, it's not impossible to get to. And probably several folks on the meeting tonight probably got something like that. It's something that doesn't come overnight, right? It takes a few years to get there, and being kind of having high expectations for your cows and not having too much mercy on them if they don't breed when they're supposed to. But certainly, all I have to say, I can't give you an exact number. It would take me too long to do the math, and I've got my boots on right now, so I'm not good at math without my boots on anyway. Don't have enough digits to count as high as it would take to move that number as much. That's the other thing about Zoom. I can assume that y'all are laughing at my jokes when I make them. When I'm there live and I tell them and nobody laughs and I can see you not laughing, that's a whole different deal than now I can just assume everybody's really laughing really hard whenever I tell a joke. So maybe there are some good things about Zoom, I guess. So, and I wasn't watching the chat, Chris. Maybe I ought to pull that up. Or you want to just holler at me if there's one if there's a question that comes up at work? Go.
I'll just let you know.
All right, good deal. Appreciate it. All right, so talking more about kind of getting down to what the title is for tonight, or what the discussion we're talking about having in this publication that, again, this is me and Andrew working on it, and then Courtney Carter is a graduate student of mine, and a beef program coordinator, works full time for UT Animal Science, and she's here at Spring Hill too. And whenever I talk about doing some kind of field work or a lot of times even these publications, what I'm honestly saying is that Courtney did it and I put my name on it. So that's kind of the way this works. Most of you'll know how that works out if you get good folks working for you. But so we all worked on this one together, just doing a partial budget, kind of a cost benefit analysis of what artificial insemination looks like economically versus just natural service in some scenarios like we just laid out in that previous one. So just to set the stage for kind of how we look at some of this, the economists, Andrew would call it a partial budget analysis. And to me, it's just weighing the positives against the negatives to see if it's worth doing. So positives, in something like this will be additional revenue and reduced expenses. Those go in the positive category. Negatives will be additional expenses. And that's when we talk about AI, it's probably what most of you think about first, and me too. And if there's any reduced revenue. So specific then to this discussion, when we're talking about doing, and I put AI up here, I probably should have put extra sync and timed AI. Positives will be more pounds because we've got more pounds from genetics. We'll talk about a little bit about shifting at calving distribution, how kind of hopefully explained how that works in that previous publication we talked about, plus fewer bulls. So that's the reduced expense side of this. And again, that's where I thought, probably if I was there live, I'd get some dirty looks from some seed stock producers, but hopefully we can show you too that if folks don't have to buy as many bulls, they can pay for, what a bull's actually, what it takes to raise them, what they're worth. But anyway, so you got fewer bulls, bull needs, especially if you're a multi-bull unit and not just running one bull. That's really where you get in the sweet spot of the partial budget analysis for timed AI. So then on the negative side, it's the cost of synchronization and actually the semen and arm service and all that. Then the reduced revenue, you don't really always think about this, but if I got fewer bulls and I'm selling fewer cull bulls, right? And that can be a significant source of revenue in some years. So we have to take that into account, put all that together, and let's see if it's worth it. So the cost of artificial insemination, I'm gonna work on this backwards. So I just put it out, positive against the negatives. I'm gonna talk about the negatives first, and then talk through the positives and see if that's if we think it's actually worth it. So these, when I say cost of AI, in that I'm actually also talking about the cost of estrus synchronization and timed artificial insemination. So especially if it's in a commercial herd. That's probably the way we're going to do it. Now, you may have a commercial herd and you watch heat and breed twice a day. That's outstanding if you can do that. There's a lot of time allotted to that, and time is money. So you kind of have to do your own type of partial budget analysis if that's the way you do it. But most everybody that's got commercial beef cows is going to do estrus synchronization and timed AI. So that's putting them through a sync protocol, a set of pharmaceutical applications that make them try to make them all come into heat and ovulate at about the same time, so you can breed them all at the same time, just literally as quick as you can put them through the chute, and try to get your as high a pregnancy rate as you can out of that. So the synchronization is a big part of the cost of AI. So I'm not going to go through all the hormones. I'm going to leave that for the question and answer, the discussion. Be glad to go through all that if you want to. I'll mention a couple of new things in that regard, but instead of going through all the protocols and stuff, just let you know that the cost that's in kind of the standard 7-day plus co-sync, or 7-day co-sync plus cedar would be one prostaglandin. That'd be like Lutalice, about $3.50. 2 shots of one you might see a lot on the market be Cistrillin. That's a brand name of GnRH. So prostaglandin, let me just go back and in case there's anybody from pharmaceutical companies on here watching. So prostaglandin would be like Lutalice, Estromate, Prostamate, Cincsure. Those are the big ones on the market. GnRH would be Cistrillin, Factoril, Fertigil, I think are the big ones. So $3 for that times 2, $6. A cedar, that's controlled intravaginal drug release device. As far as I know, there's just one of those available in the U.S. from Zoetis. So we put $13 on that. You might be able to get them for $10, but semen $20. You might use $20 or $25 trial semen per cow. And then breeding charge. This is one thing that I want to kind of hammer on probably 3 or 4 times here as we talk about the cost of AI, or just whether or not you're trying to figure out, or if you're trying to figure out whether or not you want to use AI, is that you don't have to know how to do artificial insemination to use it. In fact, I'd encourage you to not even worry about knowing how to AI yourself. Now, if you're in the dairy business, you kind of have to, because you have to do it nearly every day, right? But this is one of the big things that I think gets lost sometimes in the discussion on this. To me, it's like, I used to, when I was in high school, first truck I bought was like a 1979 F100 Ranger, and it had a old 351 in it. And I could do about most anything needed to do to keep an engine like that running, and change everything out, whatever. I don't even drive a real nice truck now. It's like a 2010, but they're still in 2010 model. I don't even know where to start on a lot of things. So I hire it done, right? I hire somebody that knows how to do it. And same thing with AI. You don't have to know how to do artificial insemination to use artificial insemination in your commercial herd every year. Okay, I just want to keep hammering it home. We teach in AI school here. There's a lot of people who want to learn how to use it. Real glad to teach folks, but you don't have to know how to do it yourself to be able to get this done in your cows. There's plenty of folks you can hire to come in one day and breed your cows if you just get them set up for them. So anyway, we put all that in here, and the labor cost went a little high maybe on the breeding costs. So that's 54, nearly $55 per cow that we're talking about investing in the estrogenizations and AI. Now, that doesn't mean that it's $55 per pregnancy. And that's kind of what I want to get to here is talking about comparing apples to apples. You kind of have to look at what the cost per pregnancy is, not just the cost to do the AI. And then on the other side, it's not that we're comparing the cost per pregnancy from AI to zero, because it still costs us something to own a bull, right? So to really do this partial budget analysis correct, and this, again, on this publication, Andrew and I used 2 different costs of bulls, $4,000 and $6,000. If that strikes you as high, I'd encourage you to be willing to spend a little more on a bull. It'll pay off too. And that's one of the things about AI is you can get to where you're using really, really good bulls. Say this year, $6,000 get you a pretty stinking good bull. And if you use AI, especially if you're a multi-bull unit, then you can get in a situation where you can afford to pay that for some really good bulls. Anyway, go through all this and looking at total annual cost of a $4,000 bull if you're using him for 4 years, being about $1,600 a year. For a $6,000 bull, using him 4 years, about $2,200 per year that you keep him. So bring all that into what it looks like when you're actually comparing what it costs per pregnancy. And again, I'd encourage you to think about it that way. So what Andrew put together here was this chart that shows you at different pregnancy rates, time to AI conception rates with what it looks like on the total pregnancy cost for just natural service. If you do timed AI and natural service cleanup bull, and you only get 45% to timed AI, or if you're doing the same thing, do timed AI and then you run up cleanup bulls, but you get 60% to the timed AI. So that's actually I said the wrong thing about these numbers top. This is the herd size, 30, 75, and 150. So again, this first column here, this is on a 30 cow herd, comparing either just turning the bulls in, doing timed AI, and then turning cleanup bulls in, and only getting 45% to timed AI, doing timed AI, then turning cleanup bulls in and getting 60% to that timed AI. The same thing on 75 head and same thing on 150 head. Let me check up here for a minute, Chris, and Scott and the other Chris. Y'all, does that, I felt like I got a little muddled in explaining that. Am I coming across all right on what we got set up here? Good. Or anybody else, if you have any questions you want to type in or ask me? Just want to make sure, since I kind of muddled that up a little bit, everybody's following me what we're comparing here.
We're with you.
All right, good deal. So if you look at cost per, this is total cost per across each pregnancy in those different situations. If I'm just turning the bulls in on 30 cows, then I'm looking at about $77 per cost of pregnancy per cow, or cost per pregnant cow. Let me just go back and say cost per pregnancy. If I'm doing timed AI and natural service for 30 cows and I only get 45% pregnant to the timed AI, it's pretty high breeding cost. Now you'll notice this, so looking at $135 per pregnancy here, and still $135 per pregnancy, even if I get 60%. And the deal there is you don't move the needle on how many bulls you need. And we can get into the nuances of this. There's some little fine differences. You won't know that ahead of time and all this kind of thing. But just, for the partial budget analysis, you're looking at $77 versus $135 cost per pregnancy when you're comparing just natural service to timed AI and natural service. And I'm going to skip to 75. You can see all that here. If you get a better pregnancy rate to your timed AI and you're kind of have everything hedged to know that ahead of time with your bull power, and you're comfortable having your bull power expected based on 60% timed AI pregnancy rate, you're looking at $93 on natural service versus $85 on timed AI and natural service. And most of that comes from reduced bull cost. Up here on 150 head, you can see how that moves the needle even more. Again, same situation, just turning the bulls in AI and then turning the cleanup bulls in, you only get 45% AI, and you turn the cleanup bulls in, you get 60%. So you're comparing, with a low pregnancy rate to the timed AI, $100 per pregnancy. Again, that's $77 per pregnancy on the natural service, kind of the same deal. And then $85 here on 60% timed AI. Okay. So that's kind of how we went through the math on it anyway, to figure out we're not comparing the cost of ester sync and AI to nothing, because bulls cost us something, but there is a definite additional cost to timed AI and artificial insemination. Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna keep on trucking unless I hear about some questions. So on the additional revenue side, this is how we figured this up. Most of this is going to come from additional weaning weight, both from genetics and from shifting the calving distribution. So again, we're kind of building stepwise and all this stuff laid out in those other charts we just looked at. So this is the average weaning weight we gave to those two situations we just looked at, timed AI 45% at 45% pregnancy rate, timed AI and 60%. So you can see how that moves the needle versus, again, we just looked through EPDs and averages of what you can get in natural service versus AI service sire. And you're looking at adding, on average, about 20 pounds per calf. And again, this doesn't take into account necessarily shifting yet the actual generational kind of good genetics on good genetics. It's just this 1 year kind of analysis here, but let's call it 525 versus and adding about 20 pounds. And then here you're adding about another 20 pounds if you get 60% of those to conceive to that timed AI that you start the breeding season with. So again, a lot of that shifting just from the first 60 days or the first 30 days, having more of those calves born if we're doing a 90% or 90-day calving season. So that's part of how we got that additional revenue. So bring it all together, and again, going back to these different scenarios with 30, 75, 150 head, natural service, time day out at 45%, and then time day out at 60%. And I'm not going to talk through all this again, but if you boil it down now, instead of just cost per pregnancy, net return over breeding cost per head, then you're looking at in these different situations with 30 cows. And again, we're very conservative on this. We don't show a strong benefit or numerically no benefit in that 1 year of doing time day out natural service with just 30 head. Now this is, we were talking about this with all the agents on this monthly webinar we do. And my boss, Dr. Strick, was on there, and I thought he was going to come through the screen on me. Because a lot of folks that do what I do like to load it up and just say you're going to make money in every situation if you do AI. But just to be real honest with you, in this 1 year, if you just look at the partial budget analysis, just on the spreadsheet, it might not make sense for you to do it. But now when you get over here into multi-bull units, if you're talking about having 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 bulls, then you start making a difference, because you're talking about being able to need less bull power if you're getting 60% of them covered to a time day eye. And that's where you get better net return over your costs to actually using time day eye or synchronization and timed artificial insemination. Okay. Any questions yet? Discussion? Anything to add? Chris, Scott? Okay. So that's all good on paper and doing spreadsheets and doing what I want to with the numbers and calling it what I want to, even if I'm being conservative, not trying to sell you slap chops and sham wows like they do on TV. That's, we can make it look like we want to. What's it look like in the real world? So I wanted to kind of wrap up talking about, a lot of times we'll go out and do demos and on-farm work with producers to, especially if we find the right situation, to try to see what this looks like in the real world and not just on paper. And that's a really important thing to all of us in UT Extension, that we don't just talk about this stuff in theory, but that we talk to you about what it actually looks like. Now, the theory is important. Stuff like those publications just talked about, we think they're important because it kind of gives you a place to start looking at this. But really, the decision is going to be made when you figure out what it's actually going to look like on your place if you decide to do it. So that's why I want to talk about this this one particular case study, or this on-farm demo. So about, I guess, 4 years ago, I was at a meeting, and a young lady that was just getting ready to graduate from college came up and asked me, said, do you think I could make a living just raising cattle full time? And my first thought was, well, it's going to take a lot of cattle. She said, my family has a cow herd, and unfortunately, her father passed away about 10, 12 years prior to that. And the herd had kind of gone downhill, hadn't been kept up in the state that he had it in, which I hear was, was a good commercial herd at the time. But, it kind of got spread out to year-round calving. Genetics weren't looked after. They were just buying some common bulls and throwing in there. So the herd had kind of gotten neglected, and told me all that. And I'm thinking, well, it's going to take several head to do it full time and count on that being your full living. So I asked her to come in with the numbers of cattle that they had and amount of land that they had. And without saying too much about the situation, I'll just say that, starting out about a little more than 200 head. So getting close to what might be enough head to make full-time living on. But more than that, they had enough ground to, honestly, you could probably get close to 800 head. So I said, yeah, okay, if you do this and do it right, you can get there to where you need to be and be a pretty neat deal. So we talked about setting up some demos. Now, 200 head, a lot of you might not have that many. So, there may be a few of you that have 3 times that much. But what we're talking about here on these number scales different ways. If you've got 20 head or if you've got 2,000 head, you can make, you can adjust the numbers and kind of think about it. But just want to show you what we did with her herd and kind of the ways, the direction that she's been moving and what it looks like when you actually start doing some of this work. So we started with her in 2018. Just went in and did an overall evaluation of the herd. And again, like I said, she was doing year-round calving. First big decision she needed to make is when did she want that calving season to be? Because again, like I said, starting out, if you know me, first thing I'm going to talk about as a repro specialist is that if you don't do anything else, at least have a defined calving season. That's where being able to make money in the cattle business starts. So we talked about how to get her there and what season that she wanted to be in. Had enough cows at the time, and certainly when she gets closer to capacity, would have enough cattle to have 2 different breeding seasons. And that was part of the discussion. Was like, do you do fall? Do you do spring? Do you do fall and spring? Moving bulls back and forth and getting more use out of them, that kind of stuff. For a lot of different reasons, she decided that she's going to do fall calving, and the entire herd moving into fall calving. So for, what we call a fall calving season will be September, October, maybe a handful in late August, but mostly September, October type calving season. And so what she did that first year, pulled the bulls out. A little bit later than she needed to. You'll see I'll show the calving distribution for that 19 and 20 calving seasons. But and then also besides just pulling the bulls, went in and started culling pretty hard on unsound cattle. Cattle had been kept too long, broke mouth, smooth mouth cows, blown out udders, bad eyes, that kind of stuff. Like I say, it was somewhat neglected herd, not animal cruelty type wise, but just they haven't been seen after real well and culled over very good. So that was the first place she started. And again, like I say, pulled the bulls until she started at the next fall breeding season in 2019. 2019 came in, after the bulls had been out for about 2 months and went through the cows. And, well, I guess it's a little bit later now, but went through the cows and culled based on pregnancy. Now, she didn't take the whole swath of everything that wasn't going to calve in that fall season, but she took the real outliers, the ones that were going to be in the middle of the summer and actual spring calving cows and that kind of stuff, and started whittling down on those. And again, took the opportunity to work on some cows that are getting a little too old to keep their condition, that kind of stuff. That year, she also had to wean the calves kind of in stages, didn't really have the ages on those calves. So, there were some that she weaned at 400 pounds in a group that she was pulling off with 7 weights that it might have been yearlings. Some of them kind of long tail and had a little age to them when you look at the mouth and that kind of stuff. But again, just trying to work through it a little stepwise and get it to where it needed to be. Another thing she did in 2019 is went ahead and bought a set. I think it was 30 or 35. She was not trying to build real big and real fast, just wants to do it steady. But she bought a set of fall-born open heifers to breed to calve in the fall. So those would have been real early fall born heifers. So they're old enough to breed to a fall calving season. And she AI'd those in 2019 using that 7-day co-sync plus cedar. The other thing she did in 2019 is she synchronized the cows for natural service. And that's something I haven't talked a lot about. Several years ago, I think at Cumberland Beef Day, I talked about synchronizing for natural service, and we've talked about it quite a bit. And still want to take the opportunity to talk about it when I can, because I think of that in a couple of different ways. It might be something that you do every year and never even do AI. But it certainly is a very good way if you've got a spread out herd to use synchronization for natural service to in a year or two leading up to when you want to start AI, just so you can get them grouped up tighter, so that when you do try to do a timed AI on your cows, you don't have some that are still pregnant and some that calved 2 weeks ago and that kind of stuff. So you can start tightening up that calving distribution with, in this case, she used MGA. really need to be using cedars if you read the label. So you see in 2020, that's what she did there with some of the cows that she didn't AI. So that was that next year, next step that she was working on toward getting to be able to use more AI than just in the heifers. 2020 did some more, certainly again, culling on performance and pregnancy and age. Bred all of her replacement heifers to AI, again, at 7 days co-sync plus cedar protocol, and synced, or actually, so bred the heifers to the 7 day co-sync plus cedar protocol, and then some of the mature cows she bred to a newer protocol called 7 and 7, so that was just this past fall that she bred some of the cows instead of just the heifers, bred all the heifers and some of the cows now. But the cows that she didn't breed this past fall, again, went back and synced in for natural service, this time using a cedar. And again, that's this 7 day application, turn the bulls in, no shots or anything on that. You're just trying to do a light synchrony and kind of kickstart them coming into the breeding season. So this is what it looks like for, the results for that first, in that 2019 had in the first 90 days, or getting to that 90-day calving season she wanted, had 63% of them born in 90 days. But in 2020, just from making those culling decisions and doing the synchronization, only AI'd the heifers, but the synchronization on the cows for natural service, got to where she had 95% of them born in that 90-day breeding season she wanted. Now, that's 95% of the calves that were born. She had overall pregnancy rate of 86%. So not getting to that 90% weaning rate yet, but moved from 75% overall in 153 days to 86% overall, and had some tail enders that took it out, the last calf 131 days out. But again, 95% of them born in that 90-day season she's trying to get to first. And then her long-term plans are to work into, a 60 and even hopefully up to a 45 when she's doing timed AI and in all the cows every year to keep those tight and have most of them front loaded. This is what it looks like on calving distribution. So again, that first year's work, the resulting calf crop, big slug of them born in October, and then you get out here and you got some that looks more like a late February deal, because you can't take, or you could, I guess, but it just didn't make economic sense in that situation to cut it all down to straight fall calving just in that first go. But the additional culling plus the synchronization that she did with the cows, that's 2 years coming into 2019, pushed it back to, you saw it a little bit on that first chart, but 72 of these calves born in September, but several of them born kind of in late August because of the way we were trying to work them back into this fall calving, but some more of them in October, and then this couple little slugs of calves that born into November and December. So what she did, we haven't done all the preg checks. Actually, next week we'll go back and preg check the rest of the cows. But for this 2021 calving season, what she's looking at is on at least the AI pregnancy rate to that 7 and 7 protocol I was talking about. So she AI'd 75 cows, got 37 of them bred AI, and so that's 50% AI pregnancy rate to the cows, and to the heifers 62%. So 36 out of 59 there. So you can kind of see as she's moving toward breeding some of the cows, 50%. We'd like to see better, but definitely not a bust at all. 50% is plenty fine to expect for AI on cows, especially if you haven't done it for several years in a row. Now, I fully expect that when she gets 5 years from now, and she's been doing this to all the cows every year, that she'll move up into those mid to even high 60s on the AI pregnancy rate for everything. Especially as she's getting heifers that were selected out of fertile cows, and you get that generational effect of improving the fertility and just putting some selection pressure on the cows. So, and I see that I'm already getting kind of long on time, but just want to wrap up by saying that, even though talking about in that publication that we linked you to, a very conservative estimate of it, in my experience, AI in commercial beef herds almost always worth it. Now, if you buy some jam up good bulls and you manage a 45-day calving season to natural service, it may not make sense for you. And we're certainly not saying it makes sense for everybody all the time. But at very, very rare occasion have I seen folks work into this and do it the right way using AI in commercial herds. Very few of them have I seen stop doing it, because especially if you got a multi-bull battery, then it can make a big effect on your cost of breeding and how many bulls you need and what you can pay for the bulls that you do have. AI it's not as difficult as you think. And again, you don't have to know how to do it yourself. You can hire somebody to do it. It's not a big deal. All you got to know how to do is work cows and what to put in them. So it's not difficult. I promise you. A lot of you can probably make a brand new, I'll say it this way. A lot of you can probably make a 70s model square baler work with a little bit of baler twine and some duct tape. And if you can do that, I promise you can AI. It's not a big deal. You can have AI done. A lot of you can learn it. I mean, all of you can learn how to do it yourself if you want to, but you don't have to. And it's just not a difficult thing to get done. Don't have to do it all at one time, and you can work into it. And like Papa used to tell me, just slow down. We're in a hurry. Play the long game. Just work into it a little bit at a time. And when you get there, you get to that situation with a lot of folks we work with. And like somebody asked a question earlier, 45-day calf breeding season and weaning a 92% calf crop to that. You won't regret the time and the cost it took to get there, and you do everything you can to keep it that way too. So, fellas, that's what I've got for you tonight. But I'll stop it there and stop my share and see if anybody's got any questions and discussion, something specific I didn't cover that you want to hear about.
Dr. Rhinehart, we got a couple of questions here for you in the chat. First one is on a 7-day co-sync plus a cedar protocol. When's the best time to turn in the natural service bull for cleanup?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to throw you a curveball with the answer. And so, I think I know what the question is actually asking. If you want to know which calves were sired AI and which are sired to cleanup bull, very earliest I'd want to put them in is 10 days after due time to AI. You may have a couple of calves you wonder about, if they calve early and a couple of them calve late to the AI, and some of them calve early to the cleanup bull. You might have a little gray area in there. If you don't know, or if you don't have to know or don't care which ones are sired AI, I shouldn't say it. You don't care to know which ones are sired AI and which ones are sired by a cleanup bull, or if you're using one bull that's a certain breed, and let's say you're using a Charlotte bull to AI2 and a black bull for cleanup, and you're going to be able to see the difference of who got it. You can turn the bulls in the day you pull cedars and get prostaglandin. Let that suck in for a minute, because that's just not something you hear a lot about. They do it a whole lot, in the Midwest and the West, and we're doing quite a bit more of it here now too, where you literally turn the bulls in when you give prostaglandin and pull the cedars. Still AI, if it's cows, 64 hours after you pull cedars and give lute or give prostaglandin, but the bulls are in there, and you're AIing over top of the bulls. And bulls will settle some of them. AI will get a bunch of them, and you'll get a bunch of calves born at the very front end of your calving season. And it's really neat. We've got one herd that we work with in Bedford County that's doing this, and actually AI to Hereford bull, and they ran Angus bulls in as cleanups. and they got a good slug of those calves born in the first 30 days that were out of the black bulls, and then about 55% of them were baldy calves. But the extra bulls they got just by what they missed on AI, because maybe they're a little early coming in or a little late coming in before and after the timed AI, they got a couple on either side of that, and it made a difference in really front loading that calving season. So the answer to the question, I suspect the way it was asked, is 2 weeks after timed AI, 10 days at the very earliest, if you want to know whether the calves are natural service or AI sired. If you don't have to know, put them in wherever you need to.
Yeah, that was a curveball.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Do you suspect any difference, or is there any research been done on embryonic loss between synchronized heat and natural heat if you're using AI?
Yeah. So there's if you go out and look for just specific research papers on that specifically, you're not going to find a lot, but there's a lot you can kind of tease out of the research that has been done. So my direct answer to that is you'll have about anywhere from 10 to 14% late embryonic early fetal loss with AI. So that means if I knew whether or not they were pregnant at, say, 20 days, and then I went back and preg-checked at 60 days, I'd have something like either, between 10 and 15. Usually it's on the 10% side of that actually lose. And we know that because, a lot of times we'll preg-check pretty quick after AI. The assumption is that there's a lot less loss with natural service, but we don't see that a lot in actual production because we don't preg-check that same way. Usually we're preg-checking a lot later, just a full season. Maybe, and most of the time it's even when we're weaning calves, so they should be pretty far along. But I'll say it this way: if you have 10% late embryonic early fetal loss to AI, there may be a statistical difference, but it would be like 8 or 9% to the natural service. You affect the follicle a little bit. Some of the follicles, if we make them ovulate early, that egg will still get fertilized. Most all of them get fertilized if we've got the sperm and egg in the right place and we're close to the right timing. But most of the difference between nearly 100% fertilization rate and, let's say, 60% single service conception rate is in that embryonic loss. Most of that's early. There's a little bit late embryonic and early fetal, like I'm talking about, but statistically it's probably a little different on the two, but in reality it's not a huge difference. That hopefully that answers it satisfactorily. We don't think there's a lot in natural service just because we don't ever see it. We don't check them the same way.
Great job on answering that question. I'd like to open the floor up. If anybody's got any additional questions, feel free to type those in the chat box down there. If it's your first time for doing that, on my screen anyway, the chat's down on the bottom in the middle. You just click on that. It'll open up the text box there where you could just type in your question. Once you type that in, just hit enter. We'd be able to see it on our end then, and we could get that to Dr. Rhinehart. Give you just a minute there if anybody's got any additional questions.
And I'll say something else, Scott. I'll wait and see if anybody's got any more questions. That first question about turning the bulls in, the way I answered it made me think something else. I didn't specifically talking about AI for commercial herds. I may have left out probably one of the bigger things I should have really leaned into on that is it's no secret that I think we underutilize heterosis in commercial herds in the Mid-South. And we're as guilty of that in Tennessee as anybody is in Kentucky or anywhere around us. Virginia, everybody just we straight breed commercial cattle, and there's if you look at industries, other protein industries, animal protein industries like hogs, chickens, fish, anything. They make an absolute art out of using heterosis, out of crossbreeding. Some of the reason we don't do it is effectively in cattle is what I said starting out is, it's just not as big a deal to us to try to be as economically efficient as we can with these herds because it's not a primary source of income. But if it were, and we needed to do it like a hog producer does it, dang sure know that commercial cows would be using heterosis a lot more in them because heterosis affects reproduction so positively. And so, a lot more than a lot of other traits that we breed for. So all that to say that using AI in commercial herds is a good way to get over some of those roadblocks to using heterosis because, we start to dilute out heterosis if we're using natural service sires and need to keep them for 4 years. It's hard to manage all that. But if you're using AI and, you're breeding a different breed bull to essentially a straight bred cow, and you can get that F1 cross and then come back on a third cross on those heifers with AI or, even natural service, and then come back to one of the breeds that she's crossed with, that you can make a more effective use and easier to apply and manage heterosis by using AI. And when gender sorted semen, when sex sorted semen gets on the same level in timed artificial insemination as conventionally frozen semen, then we'll be able to make, heifers out of the cows we want to and that kind of thing. And then it'll be even easier to use heterosis.
Dr. Rhinehart, looks like we got one last question on here, and it's any thoughts on, it says using a cedar for 2 years. I'm assuming that's the reuse of cedars and stuff. Yeah.
So, technically, I'm supposed to tell you that to use them as the label says, so the label says 7 days and dispose. But, even tonight, I've talked about a protocol that leaves a cedar in for 14 days. So that's 2 7-day periods. So we know there's enough of the progesterone in there to use for at least 14 days. They tell me that if a person was to clean them up good and keep them in a cool, dry place for storage, don't put them in a plastic bag where they'll sweat and lose some of the progesterone or get really nasty by the time you open them up next year. That's not a pleasant deal. Believe me, I've seen it. If you store them right, clean them right, there'd be enough progesterone in there for another round of 7 days. But if you use them first time on one of these 14-day protocols that talk about where the cedar's in for 2 weeks, likely not enough progesterone in there to last you for another round of that. But use them by the label.
All right. Certainly appreciate all this information tonight. Did a great job on that. I'd like to remind all of our audience here, we've got a couple of upcoming webinars. We got one on March 16th on lawn and landscape. Hey, spring's already upon us here, and if you're the one out doing all the lawn work and learning about landscape plants, need to know anything like that, March 16th at 6 o'clock. Same way, if you're interested, just call your local extension agent and we can get you that link to get you registered for that one. And also, I'd like for you to mark the date of April 8th on your calendar. That's going to be our next meeting. Just hold that date. It's going to be on mineral nutrition. We're not real sure whether we're going to do face-to-face or a Zoom. It could be a mixture of both. We could be in a face-to-face with a group and also be streaming it through the Zoom platform as well. So just go ahead and mark that date of April 8th.
We got another question.
Looks like we do have one other question come in here. Can you elaborate on the 7 and 7 new protocol that you mentioned?
You're muted, Dr. Rhinehart.
Like Chris said, you think it's my first time on a Zoom meeting, wouldn't you? Not that I've had 5 of them today. But what I was saying is that I'm going to put another link here in the chat box. So this is a link to a publication from the University of Missouri on the 7 and 7 Actually, I think I just sent that directly to Andrew that was asking the question. Let me send it to everybody. All right, so the 7 and 7 protocol, fellow that works at the University of Missouri, Jordan Thomas, developed that, and it's a little bit of a variation of the 14-day cedar protocol we use for heifers. If you look at the protocol, the sync protocol sheets that you'd see in most sire manuals that come from the Beef Reproduction Task Force, that's a group of extension specialists and researchers and repro across the country. They kind of get together every year at the ARSBC meetings and vote new protocols on and off the island and put them in those in those protocol sheets, and everybody puts them in their sire manuals. So the newer one of those coming along is the 7 and 7. It's a variation of that 14-day protocol you'd see in the sheets. But the original 14-day protocol, we only use it in heifers because it's essentially 30 days from the day you start until you actually breed them. And that's just too much time on a cow, right? If we're trying to get her rebred in essentially 80 or 85 days from the last time she calved, we can't use a month of that up just with the sync protocol. But it's a really effective protocol if you do have time to use it. So Jordan was looking to him as grad students, and thought, let me back up and say the reason that it has to be 30 days is because after 2 weeks of having a cedar in them, they'll have a big follicle ready to ovulate, and they'll come into heat really good, but the egg in that follicle is not any good anymore. So you have to let that heat and that ovulation after that 14-day cedar be the setup, and then come in later and give prostaglandin to actually time breed them off of. But all Jordan did, well, not all, there's two things he did. One of the big concepts was to come in right in the middle of that 7-day or that 14-day cedar and give them GnRH, so that resets the follicles and you get a new fresh follicle by the time you pull it again a week later. Another little nuance or difference to that is you give on the 14-day cedar protocol, you don't give any shots up front. On the 7-day cedar co-sync and a lot of the other ones, you give GnRH, so Cestrion, Factor, Fertigil, those products, you give one of those up front. Well, what you do in this one is you give prostaglandin, so luteolized, estramate, prostamate. You give one of those when you put the cedar in. So let's say we do that on a Saturday. So we come in the following Saturday, 7 days later, and give that shot of GnRH, Cestrion, Factor, Fertigil, whatever. But we don't take the cedar out. Cedar stays in. But then the next Saturday, so 14 days after we originally put it in, 7 days after we just gave that GnRH, then we pull the cedar out, give another injection of prostaglandin, and then breed. I think the timing is similar on that as it is the others, about 64 hours after that. So by doing that, I'm not going to get into all the endocrinology of all the shots and why it does it, but essentially what it does is it makes a really noticeably tighter synchronization of those cows. So more of them are in heat when you're doing the time breeding, and more of them are in heat overall. Actually, you get I think it's like an 86%, 85% estrus response rate to that protocol, where with the rest of them, you're kind of in the high 70s, low 80s that ever do show heat. So it gets more of them in heat, they're tighter, and you get a better preg rate to it. Is what he's shown in several thousand head of cattle that he's done on that research. So we've done it on about 200 head here in Tennessee so far. As part of what I try to do is when something new like it comes along, we try it out and make sure it's, like I was saying earlier, make sure it's not one of those ShamWow commercials on TV. And it does look solid on the couple hundred we've done it on. It's worked like they said it would, and good preg rates to it. And I like it quite a bit. If you happen to be doing some embryo transfer work, it's really, really good for that, because you get so many more of them in heat in that window that you can use them a week later to put embryos in. It makes a huge difference on ET, but it's a really good, so far it looks like it's a really good synchronization protocol for time to AI. And that's just in cows. We haven't done anything with it in heifers. Jordan hadn't done the research in heifers, and And the few folks I've talked to have used in heifers, I'm kind of hearing mixed results. So it may be that the timing needs to be changed on it.
Dr. Rhinehart, we certainly appreciate your time tonight, all of your information. I'd just like to remind everyone that this meeting was recorded. You know, if you would like to get the link to that recording and stuff, just feel free to give us a call at the extension office. We can forward you that link. If you've got somebody in mind that you think might, you know, benefit from hearing this and you'd like to share that link with them, just let us know and we'll be able to get them that link. So certainly appreciate everybody being on board. Hopefully we'll see you at one of these next things, March 16th for lawn and landscape or April 8th for mineral nutrition. Thanks everybody. Have a safe night and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
See you, Dr. Rhinehart.